Alrighty, folks, welcome to the maiden Unboxed Technology Dev Talk. So if anyone's watching online besides those in the office, we'll be doing this once a month, every second Tuesday during lunchtime. So the idea is you can even go online, learn something new during your lunch break. Today, the topic is on some sweet GreenSock animations. Next month, our very own Nick Capito here will be talking about some good habits on refactoring and maintaining legacy code. So not as flashy and exciting as animations, but it'll be good and helpful, and that's relevant for pretty much anyone, no matter what you do. But so today, Pat Hornby over here will be presenting on GreenSock animations. So Pat is a developer slash designer slash animator, does lots of cool stuff, and he's going to kind of show you some recent work he's been doing in GreenSock. So without further ado, Patrick, do you want to share your screen with us, and then we'll get started?
Absolutely. Welcome to all in the office. Let's see here.
There we go.
I would like to ask if everybody can see it, but we're just going to kind of assume. Hayden will be monitoring some stuff for us. So now if anyone had any questions, they can ask them through.
Yeah, they can ask. You can ask through the YouTube. There's a comment section on YouTube live stream.
Cool.
Ask questions there.
All right. So welcome. As Hayden said, my name is Patrick Hornby. I'm an interactive developer here at Unboxed Technology. Today we are going to look more into GreenSock. This is GreenSock it to me. Show of hands in the room. Who has used GreenSock before? All right. Show of hands out there as well. Who's heard of GreenSock before? All right. So we got some familiarity here. So let's get started. So GreenSock, essentially, what we're going to look at for this talk is do a really quick overview of GreenSock, what it is, why we want to use GreenSock as our tool of choice, and do a very high-level overview of it, and then we're going to kind of get into some fun code and look at some different ways of using it. The syntax is very, very easy to pick up on, very quick to learn, so we're not going to go too much into that. Plus, with the samples that we're going to look at, you'll kind of get a sense pretty quick. So what is...
Real quick, before
Yes.
you go any further,
Absolutely.
Would you mind sitting in that seat?
This one.
So you're a little closer to the microphone.
Oh. Hello.
Sorry.
Test. Are we good?
Yeah, you can
Good. All right. So what is GSAP? Which, again, for short, it's GreenSock Animation Platform. This is straight off of their site, but it is a library of animation JavaScript files. They're very lightweight, and they can do pretty much any and everything. And we're going to look more into that as to why you would want to choose GSAP as your tool of choice. So these are the main aspects. First and foremost is performance. As you saw on the last screen, it claims that it's 20 times faster than jQuery animations. It also really destroys web animations as well, any CSS transforms, transitions, anything like that. The performance is pretty amazing, and it becomes a big talking point when you start developing different applications that will go on iPad and other different tablets, because you really need performance on those. They don't have as much CPU processing power, so performance becomes a huge thing. There are a lot of different links out there that GreenSock offers that kind of shows like a head-to-head match against the different tools. So you can actually see the performance. They have like a performance visualizer thing that you can really test out heavy CPU animations to see how it performs. So you can animate transforms independently. This is really big because CSS animations you cannot do that with at all. So when we talk about transforms in CSS, we're talking translating, which is moving. We're talking scale, rotation. In CSS, the transform, you have to define each one of those properties together. With GreenSock, it allows you to animate those separately. So if you want to use a transform to move something at one speed and at a particular easing, you can also you can scale it at a different speed. So it gives you full control, which is what we want to really create some appealing animations. We'll be seeing this in the examples as well. You can animate anything. We're talking pseudo elements. You can use arrays as a selector, canvas elements, all the above. So it's really scalable. Sequencing, which is the timeline. That is huge, again, because usually with CSS animations, everything kind of happens at the same time. And then you have to call different animations in order. So timeline allows us to sequence different animations and kind of create that layered effect. Compatibility is a huge thing. A lot of CSS animations, of course, are kind of limited to the old browsers. My previous job, I didn't actually get to use as much CSS animations because we had to support all the way back to IE7. So GSAP actually converts all that for you. Everything is compatible. Full control is really neat. You can play, pause, reverse, slow down, speed up. Once your animation is defined, you have full control of how you want to use it. And of course, it's lightweight and has no dependencies. So let's get on to this. I'm going to show you a quick sample. This is from their site as well. This is an example of a snippet of code from GSAP that does an animation. And we're going to look at the equivalent of the CSS3 animation. You can see it's pretty massive. There are, of course, some arguments about file size. Of course, importing a new script will increase file size for your request. But CSS also becomes a little unruly when you're starting to develop something a little more advanced. So, I mean, I would prefer to just write a couple of lines. So we're going to just do a look at a quick tween, which I didn't realize there was a different definition of that until recently. I've always known of the animation tween. So this is in case no one out there in case you have any questions about a tween essentially is an animation between 2 points. Anything that moves from point A to point B is a tween. Anything that scales from one side to the other is a tween. The animation platform essentially animates everything in between. In between. Anyways, all right. So this is a quick little line, and we're just going to look at what it kind of break it down. The first within this method, the to method, you're doing your selector here. This can be a jQuery selector. It can be an array. It can be a number of things to select what you are trying to animate. The second argument is the duration. This is how long the animation will last, the tween will last. And this last argument is an object that they refer to as vars. This is where you list all of the different properties that you want to animate. They have some other really nice little things in there, like a delay, the easing, so forth. This is very similar to jQuery kind of format. But this is very simple. So what we're saying here is that we want the circle to turn white, and it will take a second to do so. So it's, like I said, it's pretty simple to pick up on the syntax. So we're not going to talk just about GreenSock, but how it can benefit our animations and how it can really give us the ability to use the 12 principles of animation. A lot of different sites kind of define different principles. There's typically 12 of them, and these are the type of stuff you see through Disney, Pixar, all those really high quality animations. You will see these principles. Now, of course, we're talking web interactions, so we're limited to exactly what we can use, when we can use. Obviously, we're not animating characters here, but there are some principles that we can utilize in our animations, and we'll look at those as we go through. But this is just a quick list of the animation principles. Squash and stretch, something is kind of squeezed. That really causes some exaggeration in the animation, which is also a principle. A lot of these are kind of go hand in hand. I'm not going to go through these too much right now because we are going to look at them later. But anticipation is kind of a pre-movement, so to speak. So, for example, if something was going to move, instead of just going in that direction, it'll actually go the opposite direction first. So it kind of creates a little anticipation for the user. Staging, straight ahead and pose to pose is more of a technique. We're going to look at that. Follow through and overlap is a pretty big principle that we can use quite a bit in web interactions. Easing, we typically see that for any kind of web animations. Arc, secondary action. Timing is another big thing. We'll kind of look at that. Solid drawing is very interesting. What that was referring to is weight and giving something a real sense of reality. So we're looking at two-dimensional things, but we want to make, maybe there's something we want to have it feel weighted, have it feel like it's actually in 3D space. That's something we'll look at as well. So I believe that's it for that. So we're just going to go ahead and get into some code and have some fun. This is a repo that will be available. I will make sure to send this link out, or I'll have Hayden send the link out. It has two branches. There's a final branch and a start branch. We're going to go ahead and look at the final branch and see what the final result is for this project. And then we'll kind of start fresh and kind of go through some of the code together. I am running this in Angular 5 and Webpack. Yeah. So I'm just starting up the Webpack dev server right now. All these instructions are in the repo README. So we're going to go to localhost 4200. So this will be the little intro page. This has a couple of animation movements and whatnot, but we're not going to look into this one. We're going to look at the next page, and I hope this runs smoothly since we're connected to all this streaming stuff.
This is the unfortunate part about demonstrating animations. It's going to be
not
as smooth. I'm sorry.
Normally it's really, really smooth.
Yeah,
all right, so this is the animation that we have. Oh man, it's laggy. Oh, it's really laggy. All right, well, on my screen it looked pretty smooth. So we're going to look at the last little bit here too. We can select a Ninja Turtle. I'm going to select Leonardo here. And fake out. I will explain exactly what happened. That is a interesting Angular problem. So this is our transition. And then we have this details page. So let's go ahead and start back from the beginning here. Now I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the start branch so we can kind of look at some of the code here. And sorry, I'm going to run this, bring this back up. So you're probably wondering why Ninja Turtles. Well, GreenSock and superheroes. No, someone actually suggested Ninja Turtles here at work. I was like, hey, it's a great idea. So now to get to the code, and let me know if it's too small. If I can see that. So like I said, we are running in Angular 2. I'm not going to really, or Angular 5, I'm sorry. We're not going to really go into the details about the setup of the project. But without further ado, let's look at a couple of things here. So when we go to the page, the typical way of doing this process, especially if someone else is going to style it, is to go ahead and lay out the entire scene. In this case, you're not seeing the manhole cover at that perspective angle. That is because that becomes later on in the animation. But this is laid all out, so someone else could come in, lay this all out, hand it over for animation. And this is where we're going to start. Now, since we're going to start on the manhole animation, I would actually want to go ahead and hide everything else. So let's look at real quick. These are the elements that I want to hide, so I can isolate the manhole cover, so we can animate that first. So this is the first thing we can look at that GreenSock has to offer. There is a set method, so it doesn't require a duration at all. And for our selector, we're actually going to use this array. And we are just going to go ahead and hide everything. So when this page initializes, we will go ahead, just kidding. And I will explain some of this here when it comes time. Okay, so we've isolated everything but the manhole cover. And this is the first thing that we want to bring in. So we are going to start with a timeline. With GreenSock comes some of the core functionality. There's the tween max, which does one tween for whatever property. And then, of course, you have timeline max. There's also a tween light, timeline light, but we're going to use a timeline max here. And we're going to start with, I'm tripping on the cords. We are going to start this animation by having the manhole cover roll in. That'll be the first step. We want to keep it kind of simple at first. So what we're going to do is do a to method. We're going to do our selector here. We're just going to keep it, like I said, really simple to start. Hold up. Okay, let me explain the initial state. So, as I was saying before, someone can style this, send it to myself, and then once I have this in place, you can use a method called from. So essentially, it will. We're going to tell it to start at a different position and then end in the current position. So we want it. Yes.
What defines the current position?
The styles.
Right. So like the existing CSS styles define the current position that it's going to end up at.
Correct. Gotcha. Yep. And that's why it's nice to kind of lay everything out beforehand. some of that can change, and we'll see examples of that. But to start, we want it to end in this position, so we're going to say start from a different one. So we're going to use the from method. And we want it to start, and we're going to look at some of these properties. Like I said, they're pretty straightforward. We want it to start off the screen here. And FYI, I have this set up currently in iPad dimensions, so 1024 by 768. It can get bigger, but for the sake of this, we're just going to do this. So we're going to look at, I'll explain these. Okay, so to start, in our timeline, the first action is that we want the manhole to start off screen. So we are transforming it on the x-axis. And the reason we're defining it as x as opposed to translate x, which is a transform, we're actually going to let GreenSock handle that for us, which is why we are setting force 3D to true. So when GreenSock kicks in, it will actually use the transform property, which allows whatever browser engine to use the GPU acceleration. So that's what helps to create a higher performance, smoother animation. Another part of the transform we're going to animate is the z-axis. So this will create the rolling effect. So we're in our intro animation. We set the timeline. Let's go ahead and kick off the animation when it starts, and we'll see what happens.
Check your spelling of manhole.
Mano. Hey. All right. So this is what we have so far. Now, there's different things that we can kind of do from this. To look at animation principles, one thing that we could do to maybe kind of spice this up a little bit, to create a little bit more appeal, one of the animation principles is follow through or overlap. And what that means is that we don't want this to just come to a complete stop. We want to maybe roll a little past its point and then come back. So in order to do that, and I got my little cheat sheet from the final here, we are going to, we're going to give it a different easing. So easing is in CSS animations. Most of us have seen that. You got your ease in, out. Typically what that means is that we want the beginning of the animation and the ending of the animation to go at a different speed. When you look back at the animation principles, the easing principle refers to this. It's the slow in, slow out. So something can start slow, speed up in the middle, and then slow down at the end. Right now we're running on no easing. So when you look at the animation, it has one speed the entire time. So we want to change that. Within the object here, we can use the ease property, and we can go ahead and set it to something else. Expo is one of the possible easing values, and I will show you this visualizer that they have. So if we go over here, so GreenSock has this easing visualizer. You can actually test out different eases and even get the code for what you might need. But basically all of these are different speeds essentially. So power 0, as you can see, is a linear speed. Again, it starts off at once at the same speed, ends at the same speed. This kind of is a little bit of a quicker animation. You can see that they're kind of speeding up some. So we can change this. We're saying ease out. So as you can see on the curve, it's kind of plateauing, and that's where the slow speed starts to come in. If we want, we could ease in. So it starts slow and then picks up pace. You, of course, can do both. Start slow, move really fast in the middle, and then end slow. So this visualizer is a very helpful tool. Some other cool things. You got the back ease. So you can see it goes beyond its final position and then comes back. Elastic. And again, you can actually come in here and just kind of copy this code here if you really need to. So these are the different classes you can use. We got the bounce, which we'll actually use here soon. And so circ, expo, and sine, these are the really kind of curves on steroids. They're like really fast. And I'll actually use these quite often to create more appeal. So we're going to start, we're going to add this expo ease. We're going to have it start slow, and we're going to have it end slow. And that's just to create a little bit more of an interesting effect here. And you can see it's super duper fast. Now, if we want to slow it down, in this case we do, let's change the duration and say let's have it take about 3 seconds to get through. So you can see how it comes to a slower stop. The easing and the duration really work hand in hand. If I were to change the easing to a slower value like power 4 or whatnot, this 3 seconds is going to seem longer to the user. So definitely keep that in mind, that those kind of work hand in hand. So if you want to try and test out different speeds, kind of those are interchangeable there. Do we have any questions at this point? Anybody?
You have questions?
Anybody? If I'm jumping too much, let me know. Okay, so back to the animation principle. Let's have this. Let's don't have this manhole cover just come to a complete stop. We want it to kind of follow through and come back. It'll kind of create a sense of reality a little bit. And it's kind of an easy way of doing it by using the back easing. This is the class that we can use here in the visualizer. So it'll go past its final point and then come back. The great thing about this is you can actually configure it. The higher the number here, the more it'll go past its final point. So we are going to go ahead and have it ease out, meaning we only want this back curve to happen at the end of the animation. And let's go ahead and see what this is looking like. So you can see it goes back and then, or it goes past its point and then comes back. But obviously this is way too much. And that's where the config will help us in this case. So we're just going to kind of set a lower number. And you'll see the results is that it barely goes past the point. I will say for this kind of stuff, subtlety is key. It's not directly noticeable that it's actually coming back a little bit, but those are those little things that, as they're built up, really help to create more appeal and some more realism. So now we do that. When I was first animating this, I was thinking, well, maybe we'll create a little bounce. Let's say this manhole cover is falling, essentially. The way to do that, and I think we're going to, so what I want to do is we're going to move it in the y-axis. So this is your vertical axis. It's the same as translate y. And we want it to start from a higher position than where it currently is. So we're going to give it a y of negative 300. So we want it to start 300 pixels higher. Let's just go ahead and see what this actually gives us. So you can see it's starting from a higher position and off screen. As it tweens, you are seeing it kind of come from one angle. So what we want to do, we want to cause this bounce effect, and the easiest way to do that is to use the ease class for bounce. But we want the manhole, when it rolls in, we still want it to use the back easing. And this is where GreenSock is extremely powerful, because you can't do this in regular CSS animations. We want to actually animate a different property with a different easing, and they will actually happen at the same time. So I know it seems a little redundant that we have to actually retype those, but we're going to do a bounce, and we are going to only do it at the end. So we don't want the vertical positioning to happen right there. All right. Something else you'll notice when we actually look at this animation, because we're using a timeline, every tween is sequential. So this first one will happen. Once this is completely done, the second one will happen. So you're going to see some really crazy results happen right now. See, it comes in, and then it drops. So it's kind of a neat effect, but we actually want those to happen at the same time. One way to do that, there's a fourth argument that we can use, and it's known as labeling. And this can be a simple string. You can actually call it whatever you want. It's really for your own reference. But what this will do is we can give both of these tweens the same label, and it tells GreenSock that we want these to happen at the same time. I'll show you some other really cool stuff we can do with this later, but now we'll have both animations happen at the same time. Again, you can't really do that with CSS animation. So if I start it again, see, it kind of bounces in. Now, one of the other animation principles we've talked about is solid drawing, which again is kind of the weight of the object. Man, it's really buggy, or not buggy, but laggy, isn't it? I don't know how it's looking, but anyways.
People follow along with the code, and it'll be fine.
All right. So let's try something different, just to see how we can get different results. Let's put this. Let's have this drop from a higher distance. Well, now it looks as if it has a kind of a lighter weight to it. It almost looks like a beach ball falling now, because the calculations of the bounce easing is causing it to jump even further up on each bounce. So if that's the case, we want to keep it subtle. We want to make this manhole cover look like it is heavier. So we're not going to drop it from as high of a distance. Another thing that will affect this, again, is the duration. So let's say we want to make it really come in really fast with the bounce. This will also affect kind of the weight. So off screen you can't really see it as much, but you can see that it almost gives it a little too much weight, because it's not bouncing as much because it's so fast. So these are definitely some different things that you can kind of test out. So let's see here. All right, so the next thing we're going to do is, for this animation, once it comes to its halt, I didn't fix that. We want this to fall over and kind of give a sense of 3D perspective. The CSS is already set up for this. We're actually using a div that has perspective. That is this entire div here. This has a perspective class on it, or property on it. I can show you that. So this is what will create the perspective. We're actually not rotating the manhole yet on a different axis, so we're not seeing the results. But once we do, this perspective property will give that illusion. Now, since we're stopping at this point, we want to use a different method in this case because we want the manhole to do something different. So we're, in this case, going to use the to property. So it's telling it, so take it at its current position, and then we want it to go to a different position. So I'm just going to do a little copy paste for speed it up. It's 12:37. All right, so what we want to do so what we're going to do here is we are going to actually animate the image this time. So again, this is more familiar with a jQuery selector, but we're actually targeting the image, which is what will actually rotate. Again, because the manhole ID is what has the perspective. So we want to actually animate the child in this case. So we're going to do a rotation X. So this is going to give it the illusion that it's leaning back into space. And we're going to start with just that. As you can see, we're also using a bounce easing as well. This will give that effect that it's heavier. Once it falls, it won't just come to a complete stop. So let's see real quick what this looks like. And then it falls backwards. So this is creating that effect. Now if you actually look at the inline code that comes from GreenSock, you'll see that it's using the transforms correctly. Sometimes you'll see specifically the translate, like on this guy. This is the one that essentially bounced in and came in from the right. You can see that it's using the translate 3D. That's the force 3D that we were defining on there. So, any questions at that point? At this point, anybody? Okay. So now, again, because we didn't set a label here, this is going sequential. These two share the same labels, so they happen at the same time. Once this is done, the next tween comes into place. That's why we get that effect that it stops and then it falls over. We can create even more interest. This is the animation principle of anticipation. We want to give it a sense that it's about to fall over. Currently, when we watch it, we just see it come in, we see it stop, we don't know what's going to happen next, and then it falls. So let's give the user a sense that it's teeter-tottering and it's about to fall over. To do that, we are going to animate a different property. Again, this is not possible with CSS animations because we are actually going to animate a different easing right before. So in our case, our anticipation that we're going to do is once it comes to a stop, we want it to lean towards the user and then fall backwards. That gives that extra little movement. And take this off for a second. So you're going to see it roll in. You'll see it lean towards the user and then falls backwards. As you can see, the timing is a little off. It's because of the sequential nature of timelines. We're seeing everything happen, one at a time. So we want to add a little overlap. In the area where you can set a label, you can also set a relative time. So this is kind of essentially a duration, and it's kind of a reverse duration. Because it's relative, you could do before or after. So in this case, we want this tween here to not wait for these two to finish. We want it to start a little bit before these finish. And this is kind of a trial by error. This is when you kind of test out different different delays to see how much you want that motion to overlap. So in this case, we want it to start rocking forward before it comes to a complete stop. And this is what this will create. So this tween will start before these actually finish. You'll see it kind of sways and then falls. So, any questions? I'm going to keep asking that. All right. So we're going to paste in the next scene and look at nested animations, nested timelines. So if you remember the original, the final result, once the main hole finishes rolling in, we have the background show up, we have the logo show up. That is what's going to happen in this function. So what we want to do is set up a master timeline. And the reason we want to do that, it keeps things modular, and we can actually change the order of things. We can actually have full control of the individual timelines as it happens. So let me show you what that looks like. So in the intro animation, we want to start with a master animation. And it's going to be another timeline max. And we're going to chain. This time we're going to use a method called add. And this is where we can actually add another timeline. So this original one, this is the manhole cover. We're going to pull this out and create a new function. We're going to paste that in here. We're going to keep our chaining, but this time we're actually going to return the timeline. So this actually does not get run at this moment. And then in the master timeline, we're going to simply call our manhole intro animation. As this returns the timeline, the master animation will actually run this. So let's just confirm that this is working. The intro animation starts, which starts the master animation, which calls this individual animation. We should see the same thing as before. So now what we want to do is add the next animation. Again, this is all sequential because it's a timeline. So now after that one ends, we want to start the logo and background animation to happen. So these will happen in order. Now, you're probably wondering, if I have that long of an intro animation, but I want to work on, the logo and background specifically, it gets annoying to have to wait for this entire thing to finish every single time. That is also where nested animations really, really have a great strength. So I can come down here. I can actually call the master animation, and we're going to use this method called play. So what I'm going to do is set, using the add method, I'm going to set a label. And we can call this whatever we want. This is our own reference. Let's call it manhole done for whatever reason. I can say play from this label here. So once the page loads, the manhole will already be set, and it will launch this animation right away. So now I don't have to worry every time. Where's the logo? So again, this word nested animations is really powerful. Just to look real quick, since we want to get more familiar with the code, and we're looking at the chaining here. We're starting a new timeline. We're telling the logo, we want you to start at a smaller size. So we're scaling it in the X and Y. And we're also saying start from a hidden spot. Now, auto alpha is a built-in property that GreenSock offers. It's very much like opacity, but you don't want to use opacity essentially because items are still clickable. So if you have some buttons that are hidden with opacity, the user can actually still click those. They still exist in space. We just can't see them. So auto alpha adds visibility hidden at the same time. So this way it hides it completely. And actually this is what we really want to use instead of opacity. So we're saying we want you to start hidden from a hidden spot and start from a smaller size. So when it gets to its current position, it'll actually show and it'll get bigger. It'll come back to its normal size. For whatever reason, it's not doing it.
Did you remember to sacrifice to the demo gods?
No, I forgot. Well, actually, because that's weird. But anyways, so I can actually remove this if I want to see the full animation. You can keep this label in if you want. You can kind of reference it at different times. I think when the full animation happened, the logo did come in correctly.
It did, yeah.
Yeah. Huh. And that actually could be a result of an Angular problem, which we're going to discuss next with these icons. Is there any questions at this point? Am I jumping too much? Anybody? All right, so the last animation for this introduction is that we want the icons to come in. I'm just going to copy what we had before. And you can see now that we have a new method to use. Just like the to and from method, there's also a stagger to and a stagger from. This allows you to use an array of selectors and have them animate at different times with a kind of a delay between each one. So in this case, we are doing the using this icon class. If you look in the DOM, we have 4 icons. Each one is using this class. So this jQuery selector here is actually bringing in the array. So you're actually getting all 4 of those icons, which is why we're able to use the stagger from. Again, we're using the auto alpha. So we want it to start hidden. And you'll see this new property here called cycle, which is only available with a stagger from and stagger to. This allows us to give different values for each one of the items at different times. So in this case, they're starting from the center, but they all end up in their own locations in the corners of the screen. If you remember, they're in the corners here. This allows us to set a different start point. You wouldn't think it would be a different start point in this case, but it is. Depending on the negative value, it needs to come left or come right. So cycle allows us to give different properties for each one, or different values, which is really, really powerful.
So quick question about cycle. So pretty much does it just say, okay, the first element that matches that selector gets the first element in that X?
Yes.
And then so on?
Yep.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so it'll happen in the same order that these are in. So another little thing, as you can see, the easing in this case, we're using another back easing. This, again, will kind of create some follow-through and some overlapping animation. So we don't want it to just kind of stop in its spot when it comes out. This will create a little bit of extra appeal. And with the stagger, this fourth value here is actually the amount of time between each element that comes in. So we're going to give it 150 milliseconds to in between each icon showing up. So let's just test this first to make sure this works out. We're not actually calling this animation yet because we're going to do a nested one. So let's go up to our master here. Let's add another label so we can jump if we want. Icons ready. Sure. All right, and we don't want to have to go through all the other stuff. So let's start from this point. And holy, that's big. So let's see what happened here. Jeez. You know,
Nothing like live debugging.
good old demos. There it is. Huh, some of it. Where was the other one? And where's the background? Oh, so we could always switch to the old final branch and see it in its glory. All right, we're just going to go with it. So, oh, there it is. Sure. So as you can see, they pop out one at a time. They all don't come out at the same time. We can actually switch that and see what that looks like. So if we didn't want the stagger, actually no, I'm not going to do that because we have to change the cycle. But jeez. Okay. So something else that we want to offer here. If we want to create a little more interest, in the final, you'll notice that they actually spin at the same time. This goes in hand with being able to animate a different property at a different speed, at a different easing. So we're actually calling the exact same thing as we did before. We're doing a stagger on the icons, but this time we're going to actually have it rotate 360 degrees. And we don't want it to bounce or come back the way this does, because otherwise you would see the spin go past its point and come back. We didn't want that in the result. We can actually see what it looks like. It kind of creates an interesting effect. But see, once it settles in place, it's still rotating back at this point. So for that reason, we want to use a different easing. So we're actually able to recall the same tween. And they happen at the same time because we're using our custom label here. But they're not happening sequentially. Holy. All right. All right, so that's that effect. All right, so let's see what it looks like in its entirety. go. So, any questions at this point?
I've got a question. You mentioned like it seemed like some of the animations like the first time you load the page weren't always working. Do you want to just like speak to that for a quick minute?
Yes. So in a perfect world, perfect scenario, as I said before, you want the layout completely done, and an animator can come in after the fact and essentially use the from method. So we want it to start somewhere else, end in the original spot that the CSS has stated. This is a particular Angular problem. As you can see, I actually have these written out, each icon for each turtle written out separately. If I wanted, or what I'd prefer to do, is use ng4 in this case and base it on my data array here. So essentially that's what we want to do, but the problem is with Angular, as it's processing the data, it essentially, GreenSock doesn't know when it's ready. Even though we're saying start when on ng init, it actually doesn't know that the Angular DOM is ready. So you're forced to do, in AngularJS, there was the scope apply. You're kind of forced to do this because what you want to do is tell Angular that to digest again and to kind of revamp the DOM. GreenSock doesn't know this until you actually run this command. The reason being, and this was an interesting problem, we are using jQuery selectors here. Any third-party library, whether it's jQuery selector, even Angular Element, I think runs on JQLite or something like that. Those third parties have no idea when the Angular digest is ready, or when the DOM is ready. One possible solution, and it's kind of an annoying one, is to essentially create a component for each piece. So we would actually have to.
Good job, man.
Thanks. We actually have to create a component here, and then pass the built-in element. I can't show it here, but.
So pretty much with Angular, we just take a little bit of time figuring out how to make it work right with components and all the shadow DOM and style encapsulation stuff it's doing right.
Yeah. The main solution for that problem, if you really do want to use Angular for the data to bring the data in dynamically, the real solution is to not use the from method. You have to use the to method, and you have to set everything hidden in the style sheet. So again, ideal world is to have the entire page laid out through CSS, but in those cases you actually have to hide those individual elements, because what happens is that they show, like as soon as you load the page, they show and then they disappear. I'd like to assume that I can show you that. And this was messing me up right there, man. That's what it was. So you can see they're actually showing right now as soon as the page starts. And that's because the selectors at this point, they don't see them. Now, I could also create a timeout that would essentially reset the DOM, and then they would animate, but you would see them showing, and then they would hide all of a sudden. And that's not ideal. So that's kind of an interesting Angular problem, not necessarily GreenSock, but I guess that's what comes with that territory. Yeah, and just one more real quick thing. I'm just going to switch. I know we're out of time here. I'm going to switch over to switch over to the final code here. One really cool thing that you can animate. This is one of the plugins offered with GreenSock. It's separate from the core functionality. You can animate pseudo elements. So an after or before. Another very interesting Angular problem. So let's say in our case we're using Sass. So we have a lot of nested classes and whatnot. To use this plugin, you have to know what the final composition of the selector is. So what I normally would do is come in here to the inspector, find it over here, and copy and paste that. Now the problem we're having with, in this case, is encapsulation. Angular is adding all these crazy attributes to each element, which is causing some problems. Again, this get rule has to be exact to what the final output is of the selector. So when I first brought it up, I'm sure people remember the manhole open and did nothing after that. That was from this error because the selector was not exact. There is an Angular 2. We can set the view encapsulation off.
Yeah, you can play with that.
Yeah. Now, if I did that, I'd have to revamp some of the styles because I'm actually using the pseudo host here to do some stuff. So I didn't get a chance to actually transform that. But know that GreenSock, again, can animate anything, really. This one's kind of just tickled to get to.
That's a problem for the interested reader afterwards.
Yeah. All right, and then there's some other cool stuff. The visualizer. There's dev tools, which you actually have to pay for that one, become a member, but it gives you this bar down here. So let's say you're trying a new animation and you want to have to keep going back and forth to the code. You can pause at any point. You can reverse your animation, do it slow to see how it looks. You can even jump to a nested scene and see only that. I mean, this is huge. I haven't been able to use it yet, but
So essentially, you could like make a movie with JavaScript, CSS, and HTML.
Yep. And then use some additional plugins, the Bezier curve, which is really awesome. You can draw SVGs. GreenSock has full SVG compatibility. Morph SVG. A lot of these are based on which membership you have, but there's a physics one. There's some really cool stuff.
But the basic stuff we saw today is free.
Yes. Yep. Yeah. Tween Max, Tween Lite, the timeline, all those are built in core functionality. All right. Sorry I ran out of time. Hope that was beneficial.
Awesome. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for presenting at our very first live Dev Talk. Everyone or anyone who might have joined our, I think, maximum of 7 viewers, many of which were probably in the office. Thank you all. If anyone has any questions about any of the content or any feedback or suggestions, feel free to leave a comment afterwards. This live video will be posted as a standalone video afterwards. All right, thanks so much, and we'll see you guys next month for Nick Capito talking about refactoring and maintaining legacy code. Thanks.